I was the one who handed the wedding ring to my best friend, so he could put on the finger of the girl who once said she'd die without me. It sounds like a cheap afternoon soap opera tragedy, but it was real. And what suffocated me wasn't the fact that they loved each other or that they were getting married. It was the fact that I stood there, holding the ring, wearing a face so calm even I was afraid of it. How does someone stand in front of the two deepest wounds of their life and smile? I still don't have an answer. Alyssa was the first person who made me believe that love didn't have to be loud. She wasn't the kind of girl who turned heads, but she had a way of making you want to talk more, to share the things no one ever asked about. I met her in our final year of college, when everything in my life felt as unsteady as a door that closes, but never quite shuts. Evan was like family to me. We grew up together in a small town 3 hours from San Francisco. My mom used to say Evan was the only person who could get you out of your room without shouting. When I broke up with my first girlfriend, Evan sat next to me all night, never said a word, just slid me one beer after another. He wasn't good at deep conversations, but he always knew when I needed someone. I was the one who introduced Alyssa to Evan, and I was also the one who stood by as they slowly drifted toward each other, inch by inch. Back then, I still believe I knew Evan, that if he found out I truly loved Alyssa, he'd step back. But I've come to realize there are two types of people in this world. Those who speak their needs, and those who wait for others to understand. I was the second kind, always hoping for unspoken respect, for kindness that never needed to be declared. My first mistake was believing others could read what I was trying to hide. Alyssa left after graduation. No warning, not even a message, just a handwritten note that said, "I need to live a life where I don't have to ask, what if?" I read that note over and over for months, sometimes in the bathtub, sometimes at roadside gas stations, sometimes in the middle of meetings when someone asked about a design I couldn't even remember, but not once did I ever understand it. I called Evan the night Alyssa left. He picked up quickly, almost like he'd been expecting it. I told him everything. He didn't interrupt. After a long silence, he said just one thing: "You need to leave this place." The next day, I packed up my entire life and moved to Portland. I thought it was a fresh start, but looking back, it was just me running away. 3 years passed like water soaking into soil, leaving no visible mark, yet somehow changing everything. I didn't date seriously. I poured myself into work, books, cleaning my place. Every evening, I cooked dinner for one, turned on warm yellow lights, and played old jazz records. To outsiders, maybe it looked peaceful, but to me, it was just loneliness with a routine. And then, on a quiet August afternoon, I got an email from a familiar address. I didn't open it right away. I stared at that line of text for a long time, like it was a bomb that would explode the moment I touched it. When I finally clicked it open, I already knew I wouldn't be the same afterward. You probably already know, but I wanted to say it myself. Evan and I are getting married, and if you're able, I'd like you to be Evan's best man. We truly hope you'll come. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel hurt. I just felt this absolute stillness, like when you're driving on the highway and suddenly hit a patch of weightlessness. No sound, no gravity, just you, floating in what should have been solid ground. I didn't reply right away. I shut the laptop, went outside, and walked along the river. The late sunlight cast a soft orange over the water, but I didn't see any of it. I wasn't thinking about anything. My mind felt like an empty room. No pictures, no furniture, just a single person standing in the middle of the cold floor. The next day, I typed my response. "I'll be there." Short, emotionless, no exclamation point, like confirming a business meeting. The wedding took place at a ranch in the Oregon mountains. I arrived 2 days early and stayed in a small room they had set aside. Inside, a tuxedo hung neatly on a rack, along with a handwritten card. "Thank you for coming. You've always been part of this." No signature, but I knew who it was from. I read that line in silence. Didn't fold it, didn't throw it away. Just set it gently on the table, as if it might break. Then I sat down on the bed and stared at the white wall for almost 2 hours. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I just kept circling around one question. Who am I in this story? The loser? The one left behind? Or just a supporting role who never realized when he'd been written out of script? The air in the room still held the chill of the mountain night. Even though the door had been shut for hours, I didn't light the fireplace. Not because I was warm, but because I wanted that cold to seep into my chest, into my bones, just to remind myself I was still alive after everything. People talk about pain in love stories like it's a nail driven into flesh. But no one tells you that the worst kind of pain doesn't bleed. It just leaves you hollow. I didn't think the day would end like this. When I signed the RSVP card, I thought I was strong enough. When I tried on the tuxedo in my hotel room yesterday morning, I still believed I was okay. When I handed the ring to Evan in front of hundreds of eyes, I managed a thin smile, just enough for the camera to catch. But now, it was just me, an old wicker chair, and the same tired questions I'd avoided for the past 3 years. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't sad, but because some sorrows don't come out as tears. They settle so deep. They don't know how to find their way out. You don't break down. You just sit and feel yourself slowly sinking. I remember one time, back in high school, Evan and I swam out too far from the safe zone at the local lake. We were racing, seeing who was faster. I was too focused on catching up, and only when I stopped did I realize how far I was from shore. My body began to give out. Water filled my mouth. I thrashed around. No one heard me call out. Evan turned back just in time and pulled me in. That was the only time in my life I truly thought I might die. Tonight felt the same. Except this time, no one came back for me. I listened to the clock ticking. Each click echoed in the wooden room like the second hand was carving into my skin. I thought about Alyssa. Not the Alyssa from the day, the radiant bride in white, but the Alyssa from years ago, lying sprawled on the carpet in my living room, legs up on the sofa, chewing gummy bears and asking me dumb questions about married life. She once asked if I believed in fate. I shook my head. She said, "Then I'll make my own fate." And she laughed like everything was within reach. I used to think that too. I had planned to propose to her on top of Half Dome, the trip we'd planned for the last summer before starting our jobs. I imagined the look on her face when she turned around, eyes wide, tears brimming. I had the words ready, never written down, for fear they'd lose their honesty. But she left before I ever got the chance. Maybe she was waiting, too, for a sign, a step forward, one moment of courage from me. But I never gave it. I just stood still. Truth is, I've always been good at standing still. I stood still when I saw my mother cry in the kitchen, while my father slammed the door after another fight. I stood still when Evan told me he was dropping out for a year to find himself. Didn't argue, didn't speak. I stood still when Alyssa said, "I'm not sure we're on the same path anymore." I listened, nodded, and let go of her hand without trying to hold on. I thought I was calm, but now I know I was just afraid. Afraid that if I spoke up, I'd lose control. Afraid that if I held on too tightly, I'd lose him forever. So I stayed quiet, let others choose, and when they chose not to stay, I blamed the circumstances. There was a knock, so soft I almost thought it was the wind. But no, I knew who was on the other side. Even without footsteps, without a shadow, I knew Evan would come. I didn't open the door. I didn't have to. I just sat there, silent, and a moment later, the door opened. He stood there, no tuxedo, just a plain white t-shirt and old jeans, like the Evan I knew from the hundreds of photos we'd taken together over the years. But his eyes were different. The humor was gone. The carefree mask stripped. All that was left was exhaustion and a sorrow that had no name. He sat down, didn't say a word. I didn't look at him, not out of anger, but because I didn't know what I'd see. I was scared that if our eyes met, all the walls I'd been holding up would collapse. I heard a sigh, then silence, then the slow beat of air between us. Evan didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't apologize. He just sat there like he did years ago, the first time I had my heart broken, when no one said anything. Maybe, after everything, we still remembered how to sit in silence together. Truthfully, I didn't know what I wanted from this. An explanation? A confession? A fight to finally let it all out? But none of that happened. We just sat there like two shadows of the past, facing each other in a room filled with too many things left unsaid. I thought about the night Alyssa left. I had sat on the balcony all night, lights off. I thought she needed space. I believed that if she really loved me, she'd come back. But she didn't, and I didn't go after her. Later, Evan told me she'd come to see him that night, just to ask one question. Why didn't he ask me to stay? When Evan told me that, it felt like all the air was sucked from my lungs. I had the chance, and I let it pass. Not because someone took her away, not because she changed, but because I was afraid, because I thought love was enough, without words, without holding on, without stepping forward. I was wrong. Evan was still sitting there, not looking at me, but I knew he was wrestling with something inside himself, just like I was. Neither of us were winners. One got the girl, but would never know who she once waited for. The other lost her, and never had the courage to take that one final step. And maybe the worst part is knowing that if we could go back, we might still do it all the same, because of fear, because of weakness, because no one ever taught us how to face these things. I felt something break inside my chest. Not tears, not sound, just a small, quiet crack, barely noticeable, but you know it's permanent. I didn't tell Evan I forgave him. I didn't need to, and he didn't need to ask. We just had to sit there for a few more minutes, letting time pass between two men who once thought they were strong, until one of us stood up. Evan went first. No goodbye, no glance back. The door closed softly behind him. No sound at all. I stayed, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I needed to sit with this room one more night. Needed to sit with myself. The version of me who always stayed silent, always stood at the edge, always believed that waiting was enough. I know I can't go back and change things. But at the very least, I can sit here for as long as it takes until the ticking clock on the wall stops hurting and just becomes time again. And so the night passed. After that wedding, I left Oregon with nothing but a small backpack. No goodbyes, no notes. I booked a train instead of flight, not because I was afraid of heights, but because I wanted time to stretch out a little longer, not to think, but to feel empty. I didn't want to go home. That place was too familiar, too quiet, and filled with too many mirrors reflecting a version of me I no longer want to see. I arrived in Carmel by the sea on a gray afternoon. No rain, no wind, just a heavy, muted air that seemed to hold its breath. I'd passed through several seaside towns before then, low hills and mountain ridges where gas stations were the last man-made things before the horizon disappeared. But nowhere made me stop until I saw the ocean in Carmel, blue, hazy, and unhurried, and thought maybe I should stay a while. The house I picked was a homestay nestled under pine trees. Not flashy, not picture perfect, but just right. It didn't ask me to pretend to be anyone. White walls, red tiled roof, bougainvillea vines not too vibrant, but still colorful enough to make my eyes blink. Claire was the one who opened the door. She didn't greet me with the usual tourist town smile, but she wasn't cold either. Just a neutral gaze and a single question. "You're Matthew?" I nodded. She didn't linger on my face, just stepped aside to let me in, holding the door gently like someone used to welcoming strangers. I dropped my backpack and listened to the sound of fabric brushing the floor. It felt like a quiet exhale from my chest. She asked if I wanted tea. I meant to say no, but I nodded, not because I was thirsty, but because I didn't want to leave that soft silence too soon. We sat on the back porch, a ceramic teapot, grayish blue, the scent of mint, and something else faint like memory. I didn't speak. She didn't ask. Only the sound of wind and leaves brushing against each other, like old lovers whispering in a world that no longer remembered them. I glanced at her, not out of curiosity, but because she had a way of sitting that felt honest, not stiff like someone trying to look relaxed, not slumped like someone who'd lost faith, just someone who'd been through enough to know that sometimes doing nothing is the closest you get to being present. Claire was 5 years older than me. I found that out later, from the reservation chart pinned in the kitchen. But at that moment, I couldn't tell. She didn't have that older woman air. She simply had the presence of someone who had lived, who had loved, trusted, been hurt, and still managed to stay with herself. A little girl appeared not long after, maybe 8 years old, lightly curled brown hair, holding an old cloth doll, ink-stained dress. She looked at me without shyness, without confusion, just the way a child sizes up a new character in a worn-out book. I smiled softly. She didn't smile back, just sat beside her mother and started drawing. Claire introduced her. Her name is Lily. I just nodded, and Lily didn't greet me either. But in that brief moment, I felt something strange, as if I'd been allowed to exist in their little world without needing to explain why. The days passed slowly after that. I didn't do much. Morning walks to the ocean, reading on the porch in the afternoon, sitting in silence at night. Claire was the same. She worked on her laptop, cooked simple meals, taught Lily math, or read books. Nothing out of the ordinary, but that's what made it feel safe. Not welcomed, just left alone. I realized I was starting to count time by the sound of Lily's footsteps on the wooden floor, the way Claire always spun her teacup 3 times before sipping, the breeze slipping through the door crack at exactly 6:18 p.m. each evening. One day, as I was writing in my room, the door opened. Lily walked in, holding a small rock. She placed it on my desk without saying anything. I didn't ask, but when I looked closer, I saw a tiny crack running through it. Like me, not shattered, but no longer whole. I kept the stone in my coat pocket, not because it was special, but because it came from someone who never asked anything of me. Claire never mentioned her ex-husband, but sometimes I saw her gaze stretch too far, as if trying to see through the days she had already lost. I didn't talk about Alyssa either, but I knew I no longer thought of her the way I used to. We shared a few dinners, always initiated by Lily. Claire never said no, but she didn't act thrilled either. I liked that. I hated people who pretended not to see the distance just to avoid the silence. Once, while I was washing dishes, Claire walked in. She didn't say anything, just stood beside me, drying each plate I handed her. Our hands touched once, just lightly, but we both froze, then continued like it hadn't happened. I thought about that touch for a long time, a nameless brush, no explanation, but it lingered like warm water meeting cold skin. I wasn't sure if Claire thought about it too, but that night, when I stepped out onto the porch, she didn't join me like she usually did. We began to avoid each other, not out of coldness, but the way people do when they know that if they meet too often, they'll have to admit something they're not ready for. I didn't know if it was affection or fear, but I knew if either of us spoke, something would break. And neither of us wanted to break it. Claire had a way of keeping her distance. She didn't push me away, but she didn't let me in either, just like me. I started writing more, not the aimless notes I used to scribble. I wrote about the sea, the White House, the woman with tired but unwavering eyes, the little girl with a cracked stone. I didn't name anyone, but every word carried someone within it. One morning, I decided to leave, not because I didn't want to stay, but because I knew if I stayed any longer, I wouldn't leave at all, and I didn't want this house to become another bittersweet memory in someone else's life. I didn't leave a goodbye, just a folded piece of paper. the way Lily used to give me things. On it, I drew 3 things: a door slightly ajar, a man standing with his back turned in a glowing light. No words, no names, but I think they would understand. I left, quietly, just like I had arrived. I returned to Portland after 3 weeks of wandering. The small apartment hadn't changed. Still the gray walls, the old heavy curtains, and the single chair in the corner where I used to sit every night doing nothing at all. I turned on the lights, opened the window to let the air pass through once, then shut it again. A ritual confirmed that yes, I was really back. The fridge was empty. The mailbox stuffed with ads and bills. I organized things, went back to work, answered emails, cleaned out old clutter, but something still didn't feel in the right place. At night, I tried to live like before. I still cooked for one, still read a few pages and left the book open, still turned on the warm yellow lamp in the living room, as if to reassure myself I wasn't completely alone. But a strange emptiness began to take shape. No clear form, no clear edges, just something that carried the sound of a little girl's laugh and the tired but warm eyes of a woman folding laundry in the slant of sunset. I didn't reach out, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure if my presence still belonged. Claire wasn't the kind of person who needed someone bothering her, and I wasn't the kind of person who wanted to stir things up when peace had finally returned. But sometimes on rainy days, I'd find myself thinking about that red tile roof and the bougainvillea trailing down over the porch. I remembered the way Claire poured tea, quiet, deliberate, like every movement was a note in a muted symphony. I remembered how Lily handed me that little stone, said nothing, just gave it, as if that alone should be enough for me to understand. The message came on a Monday morning. I was drinking coffee, scrolling through the news, when my phone lit up. The sender was Lily Claire's. The text was just 2 lines, no punctuation, no emojis. Mom has been tired for days. I don't know what to do. I stood up immediately. No coat. Didn't turn off the stove. Just one thought, I have to go. The trip took 7 hours. The road wasn't particularly long, but it felt like the longest journey I'd ever made. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want Claire to feel she had to respond to anything while she was unwell. I just came, for the first time, without hesitation. Claire was lying in bed, exhausted, eyes closed, her forehead warm to the touch. Lily sat by her side, dark circles under her eyes, but not crying. She simply handed me a warm cloth, then stepped out of the room, as if she already knew I'd come. No greeting, none needed. When a child trusts someone enough, she doesn't need to say, "You're a good person." I cared for Claire like it was something I'd done 100 times before. Boiled water, cooked porridge, wiped her forehead. There was nothing romantic, nothing symbolic, just one person staying when the other had no strength left to keep going. That first night, I slept out on the porch. It was cold, but I didn't mind. I didn't know what Claire would say the next day. Didn't know if she saw me as someone who belonged there. When she opened her eyes around midnight and saw me changing the cloth on her forehead, she didn't turn A. I stayed for 3 days. Claire didn't say much. Neither did Lily, but I could feel the air had changed. The silence wasn't tense anymore, not the kind that comes from people afraid of being hurt. It was a quieter kind, one that all 3 of us understood that something was starting again from something very small. On the morning of the 4th day, I sat with Claire on the porch. She was feeling better, sipping a bit of tea, her hair tied back, still without makeup. I told her an old story about my mother, the woman who used to walk 6 kilometers every day just to buy the exact kind of bread I liked. Claire didn't laugh. She just looked at me for a long time. Then she said softly, as if afraid of disturbing something delicate, "Thank you for coming." I nodded, didn't say anything else, because I knew that if I said too much, she'd have to rebuild her walls, and I didn't want that. Before I left, Lily handed me another piece of paper, 3 drawings again, a house, a man watering the garden, and a cat curled up sleeping on the doorstep. I asked, "What's the cat's name?" Lily shook her head. Doesn't have one. You name it. I looked at Claire. She smiled, tired but not sad. I don't know when I'll return, and I'm not sure Claire will ever call me back. But for the first time in many years, I don't want to keep running anymore. I just wanted a place where no one asks, "Are you sure you're staying?" But instead quietly sets out a chair, a cup of tea, and a silence that can be shared. Not all of us go through loud, dramatic tragedies that change. Sometimes, what silences us are the quietest things: a look that says nothing, a door left slightly open, or a person walking away when we didn't have the courage to ask them to stay. Matthew's story isn't filled with big climaxes, but that's exactly what makes it real, because it reflects the truth of many people. Those who chose silence instead of expression, who let go instead of holding on, who kept going without knowing where they actually wanted to stop. The lesson here isn't about how much you love someone. It's about whether you have the courage to stay, to speak up, to take that one step forward when it matters. Because some chances once missed never come back, and all that's left is a silence we try to give meaning to. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. Not everyone chooses to listen to something this gentle, slow, and emotionally honest. But if you saw yourself somewhere in Matthew, in Claire, or in Lily, or if there was ever a place or a person that made you want to stop running, please share the story with them. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, quiet but true, please support the channel by clicking like, subscribe, and turning on notifications. That's how you help us keep telling the stories that are hard to say, but deserve to be heard. Once again, thank you for listening, for feeling, for being here.